Why do MMA legends keep failing to transition to boxing? Nate Diaz winning the hearts of MMA fans this weekend, putting Jake in an illegal guillotine in true Nate Diaz fashion. Asking this bloke not to use his skill set in boxing is like asking a chicken to come for a swim. It's almost a subtle show of, listen, you might be winning this, but this is how easily I get you in MMA. Regardless, Nate unfortunately lost to Jake via decision. Jake saying this about Nate's guillotine.
If it was an MMA, I would have dropped to a double leg, picked him up and dropped him on his head.
I think I can smell shite.
Now, one thing to consider is that the majority of the MMA fighters that we see make the transition to boxing are way past their MMA primes. Looking at Anderson Silva, Tyron Woodley and Ben Askren, who was notorious for having zero hands in the first place and being an all-out wrestler. Nate Diaz being lumped into this category. I mean, brother straight up turned into a grandma in that post-fight speech.
Hey, be nice. Be nice. They were trying to fight each other. Cameramen are fighting here too.
Conor McGregor wasn't necessarily past his prime at this point. However, to think he was going to beat the best defensive boxer of all time in Floyd Mayweather was farcical. And he didn't look much better against Floyd than Jake's brother Logan did in his respective fight against Floyd. Obviously, there is a big size difference and advantage for Logan, but it's still notable. While it's no secret the average MMA fighter murders the average boxer in a street fight or in the octagon, I do wonder if these MMA fighters do actually believe they can compete with boxers at their own game, or if they're just willing to take the dive for the undoubtedly higher paychecks they will receive in the boxing realm compared to the average MMA bout. It's almost like half these guys are setting up the pension funds and taking the ego hit to get railed by a Disney kid at this point, in a discipline they're mostly foreign to. With Nate Diaz making $20 million in his fight against Jake, which is a significant amount more money in one fight than in his entire UFC career combined. MMA fighters spend their time learning multiple disciplines, especially the ones at the top of the food chain. Most times are very well-rounded fighters in multiple disciplines, from kicks, circling, shooting for takedowns, sprawling, grappling, cage work, clinch work and striking. But in the boxing ring, footwork becomes more nuanced, with fighters needing to pivot and cut angles and maintain proper balance. This transition can lead to awkward movements and leave them vulnerable to well-timed punches. It's like a video game character, where MMA fighters diversify their points across magicka, stamina and two-handed skills, whereas boxers put all of the points into their boxing. So it's no surprise that they completely outclass MMA fighters when they try to do the same dance. While some MMA fighters are known as great boxers, they train differently than the Queensberry boxing rules, so therefore they wouldn't train in a way that would be effective in the boxing ring. Boxers need to have pristine footwork as well as the ability to bob and weave to evade punches, whereas the MMA fighter can rely on such things as the clinch to avoid damage. And this means that they would have to recalibrate the footwork and defensive tactics when taking on a pure boxer in the ring, like putting a square peg in a round hole. And we saw this glaringly with Nate Diaz, just relying on his iron chin to absorb Paul's strikes, which he does anyway, but there wasn't much of a change in the game plan, which ultimately had him fall short and get dropped in the 5th round. This is even more amplified when we consider the difference in glove sizes, with boxing gloves being significantly larger and more padded than MMA gloves, meaning boxers have a lot more surface area to block with, therefore meaning they have to strike with precision and pinpoint accuracy to penetrate the blocks of their opponents, which is less common with the average mixed martial artist. On top of this, boxers use a stance known as the bladed stance, where the body and feet pointing towards their power side. This presents the smallest possible target for strikes and gives them better range on their jab, while allowing for more force from the power hand due to a larger torso rotation that develops more force along the way. I want to highlight this with the image shown on screen of Ben Askren standing square against Paul's bladed stance. In this scenario, Paul can defend with his arm and shoulder, whereas Askren's whole body is open to be struck. He would have to defend his face with both of his hands, which is asking for a Hadouken to the daddy-o barbecue gut he's got going on. Nate Diaz is known for being a cardio athlete, training in many Ironman competitions and triathlons. He He is the exception for being able to stay in there without turning into a Samoan trying to take the stairs. However, most MMA fighters would have the cardio disadvantage here, as in the boxing, the fights can go on for a lot longer, up to 36 minutes across 12 rounds, with MMA rounds being 17 minutes for a 3-round fight and 25 to 29 minutes for a 5-rounder. So is there any realm of possibility where MMA fighters can have a fair fight with boxers? Obviously, boxers transition into MMA would be a way bigger fail than MMA fighters to boxing. So is there a middle ground where boxers and MMA fighters can fight on a more even playing ground? Well, a fight league called Triller have been put into use a fight style where they can mix boxers and MMA fighters, incorporating both boxing and MMA rules, where they fight in a triangle, not that triangle, in an attempt to level the playing field for both parties. MMA legends such as Frank Mir and Matt Mitrione taking part, as well as the #1 African champ Mike Perry. The promotion combines boxing and MMA rules with crossover gloves, but the big problem I see with this is, to be frank, it's basically just boxing but with spinning back fists and a Thai plum clinch. This to me isn't a fantastic way to have a crossover of styles. All of this to say that these things can be overcome. We've seen plenty of MMA guys have some degree of success, even against full-time boxers. It's just to say that when MMA athletes face high-level boxers in the ring, the odds are almost always in the favour of the boxer. Just like vice versa, if a boxer came to the MMA world, they would be fucked. In my opinion, I think that MMA and boxing should just remain separate. I think it's borderline impossible to have a fair crossover. So what do you think? Let me know. Cheers.